Hi, and welcome back to Butchery 101. Today we're breaking down a bone-in, skin-on Boston butt. I'm pretty damn stoked about this beautiful Boston butt from Beast and Cleaver. They got it from Pure Country Farms in Eastern Washington. The term Boston butt is kind of misleading because it makes you think that the meat is from the animal's rear end, but actually it's from the shoulder. Oh, I am so grateful for skin-on pork. It's actually really hard to come by from small farms, so this is really special to have in-house. So let's get started with a little tour. The top half of the meat that you see here is often what's referred to as the Boston butt. On the right is where the head would have been. On the left is where the loin goes, and that's where you usually get pork chops. Down there, that's where you get the picnic ham. The bones that you can see here are the neck bones, including the feather bones there towards the top, this bit of spine here, and a little bit of the ribs along the left side here. So here's the back fat. This stuff runs all along the back of the animal, but this particular portion will be the thickest it'll ever be on that animal. So this particular cut is really popular for curing for lardo. It's also what you'd dice for charcuterie inlay because it has the same amount of protein in it almost as the meat. So we're going to start here at the feather bones. Those are the really thin parts of the vertebra that stick straight up. They're super thin and flat, hence the name. So it's really easy to just trace the outside of them and then work your knife underneath them, always keeping your knife next to the bones. I'm mostly doing small exploratory cuts to uncover the bones themselves, keeping the blade really shallow, so even if it's hard to see where the bones are, I'll minimize any undue damage to the meat itself. Once you get a good amount of the feather bones released, go ahead and start on the rest of the neck bones. So you can go along the vertebra, down by the ribs, and just kind of trace around where you can see the bones. Sometimes there's a little layer of meat just on top of like a weird bony knob or something. So use your non-dominant hand to kind of feel around where you think you could be cutting but aren't sure. It's a really great way to kind of see what you can't really see. Use the weight of the meat itself. Gravity should be your best friend. Now that we have both sides released, lift the bones as you cut so that the weight of the meat itself helps separate them from the roast. Then you can just make small snips with your knife to release the bones. Vertebrae have a lot of nooks and crannies, so you have to balance how much time you want to spend on them versus how clean you want them to be. But honestly, I'm going to use these for stock later, so a little meat is not going to hurt. So now the next thing to do is to take out the scapula. You can see this end of it, that's actually the end of a humerus bone, and then around the corner, this is the back end of it, the short end of the triangle, I guess. That white line there is a little sliver of cartilage at the very end of the blade bone. So I like to start by checking with my fingers where the meat has give, like there, and then where it doesn't. So there, you can tell that there is bone behind the meat that I'm poking, or there's not bone back there. So when I start to cut, I will be aiming for the portion of it that I know where there's bone directly behind there. And now that my knife has contact with the bone, I'm just making small exploratory cuts again in the direction of the back end of the shoulder blade like I showed you guys earlier. This is one of the actually two bones that are in there. It's the end of the humerus bone, which is the pig's like arm bone, I guess. You can see that's the end there, and then it would have extended out in that direction when the pig was whole. So I'll be honest with you guys, at this point, the pork butt is giving me a little bit of trouble because I think I forgot how the shape, the thickness of the back fat and the stiffness of the skin change the way that the meat behaves. But I'm here to tell you that you can make mistakes on stuff like this and it'll still turn out just really fantastically delicious. So I just wanted to, in the interest of full disclosure, tell you that I originally had planned to kind of open up the entire pork butt, which you can see me still attempting to do in this footage. And then there's a technique to remove a scapula, or any bone really, where you score both sides, making sure to cut through the bone skin. And then you can, if you've done it properly, you can take a towel or two and then grip the bone and just try pulling it out. Full spoiler alert, it did not work this time around. And so here's a little bit of footage of my struggle to do this bone pulling technique. You can see the left side of the roast keeps folding over on where I need to be working, and I was unable to get this to work out. But let that be a lesson to us all that you should have a wide variety of tools and techniques at your disposal so that if you do find yourself running into a little bit of a corner like this, you can pivot just a little bit so you can still get the job done. So by now I've kind of figured like, oh, I'll never get this thing to pull out that way. I'm just using really shallow exploratory cuts again, pulling still on the bone and using the weight of the meat to pull itself away, and I'm just cutting to release it. So this is definitely not a candidate for the clean bone challenge. I could definitely trim most of this off, and then that'll go into trim, which will be great for sausage and ground pork. And then anything that's left over on there is gonna make great stock. And here we have a boneless, skin-on pork butt. Those little pockets in there are great for stuffings like chopped garlic or herbs, but our next move is going to be to remove the skin and the back fat. When I'm taking a layer of fat off like this, I like to start at the thickest part of the fat. So that's this corner up at the front. I covered this technique in detail during the pork belly video, so go ahead and check that one out if you want to hear more details about this particular technique. And don't be afraid to push the fat away as you're cutting. Something that made me really slow when I was first learning butchery was that I was being really precious with the meat. Like I was being a little too tender and delicate with how I moved it around, and then it would just take forever to get through an entire pig. So, like I said, don't be afraid to push it around and get it out of your way as you're working. And so here you have one skin-on slab of back fat. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had lardo or if you want to see a curing tutorial from this channel. You can also dice this stuff up to put into fresh or cured sausages or pâtés. This guy became chicharrones in my house. Alright, so here we have one boneless, skinless pork butt. This is where the head would have attached. This is the copa area. That's where the blade bone was. And this is the longissimus or loin muscle that turns into pork chops. And now all we have left to do is to tie up this roast. There are a few different knots you can use, but I'm using the butcher's knot for this particular roast because I want to be able to portion and freeze it in smaller portions. I like to leave the seam side away from me and then start in the center and then work my way out towards the edges. If there were a stuffing, I would do one center line just to dictate the tightness of the whole roast, and then do either end so that the stuffing doesn't come out. But because this one doesn't have any filling, I'm just going like halfway towards the edges. And don't be afraid to tuck the little loose ends of meat underneath the string, or adjust the strings, or even cut them off and redo them as you see fit. They don't have to be perfect your very first try, so practice and fix what you need to. Just make sure to keep the meat super cold by popping it into the fridge or freezer periodically. Now that it's all tied up, I'm going to face the roast, and that means that I will cut off the kind of uneven edges so that the end of the roast is a flat surface or face. Obviously, this one could be a little bit flatter, but I wasn't going to trim off another inch of meat to make it completely flat. Because I know this is for my home's use and I know the provenance of this pork, I'm not super worried about making it look exactly perfect, but it is still a good practice to have. And there you have it, 2 boneless Boston butts tied and ready for your freezer or your crock pot. Isn't this just the most beautiful pork you've ever seen? The deep pink hue and the marbling here are so dreamy and really indicate the kind of flavor bomb this meat is. And now I'll bring back all the components so you can see the full yield of a bone-in, skin-on pork butt. The bones yielded about 3 quarts of stock. I got quite a bit of stew or stir-fry meat, plenty of meat to grind, and a slab of skin-on back fat that became chicharrones, and of course, 2 beautiful Boston butt roasts. I hope this inspires you to try out some butchery at home, or at least feel more comfortable talking to your butcher or farmer about the meat you want to buy. Thank you so much for joining me today for this butchery video. I really appreciate your time and would love your feedback. If there's anything you liked or didn't like, please let me know in the comments. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notifications bell. It really helps me out when you do. As always, stay strong, stay safe, and seriously, unless you're fighting for a better future for us all, seriously, stay home. Wear a mask, Seattle!